In this lesson on the church and gender, we want to quickly summarize everything else the Old Testament has to say about women. I know it's not fair, but we're going to try to get it all done in one lesson because we got a lot of ground to cover. And I particularly want to look at some distinct women of the Old Testament and what they tell us about what was normal in the text and the culture of the Old Testament regarding women. Because it seems like whatever you decide on the New Testament and what it intends for women is in some sense going to be conditioned on what the Old Testament says. Not completely, but in some sense is going to relate to it. So let's get a kind of groundwork here. What is the state of Old Testament women and what can we learn from it? First one I point out is Deborah. Deborah in Judges 4, 5, and 6 is a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth. She was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the people of Israel came up to her for judgment. She sent and summoned Barak the son of Abinoam from Kadesh Naphtali and said to him, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun?" Deborah is an interesting example for a lot of reasons because of the overall trajectory of the book of Judges on women, which we might talk about some other time. But specifics mentioned here in these two verses. She is a prophetess. A prophet is a spokesman for God, an authoritative spokesman for God. Her word is law, and that's the role that Deborah the prophetess has. She is the judge of Israel. She is sitting under the tree of Deborah, and people are coming to her for a verdict, a binding, authoritative verdict. And all Israel, there's no indication that it's just women who are coming to ask questions, all Israel coming. And if that wasn't clear, she then summoned Barak. Barak is a general, and she summons him. What does summon mean? Summon doesn't mean, hey, could you come here if you have a minute? It's get over here. I have a word to say to you. It's an authoritative call she is making. So she has this authority. And so when you look at Deborah, you see an example. I'll admit, all the other judges in the book of Judges are men. She's rare in that sense. But she is a clear example of a very authoritative woman in the Old Testament narrative. Another fascinating passage is from the other end of the Old Testament story. This is near the beginning with Deborah. Huldah is near the end, 2 Kings 22, 14, and 15. So Hilkiah the priest, and Ahikam, and Achbor, and Shaphan, and Asaiah went to Huldah the prophetess, the wife of Shallum, the son of Tikvah, son of Harhas, keeper of the wardrobe. Now she lived in Jerusalem in the second quarter. And they talked with her, and she said to them, "Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, tell the man who sent you to me, thus says the Lord." So what are we getting out of that particular passage? There are definitely male leaders present. Lots of them. They're not in charge. They're in charge of what they're doing, but they go to Huldah. She is another prophetess. They go to Huldah, even though if the historical lineup is what I think it is, Huldah is a contemporary of Jeremiah, Zephaniah, Nahum, Habakkuk. It's not for lack of male prophets that they go to Huldah. They go to Huldah because she's important. They had options. They went to her. She is a counselor to King Josiah's court. And in this text, she's asked to weigh in on a very important question. I didn't give you the whole context, but if you read that chapter, in 2 Kings 22, Chronicles 32, they've discovered the law. They're reinvigorating the religion of God's people, and they're going back to the law of Moses, and they're asking her, okay, we kind of rediscovered the law of Moses. What do we do with it? And she's saying, here's what God says to do. And she's telling that to a priest and a king. So she is an extraordinarily influential woman. She prophesies and she issues commands. Here's what you're going to do. God told me to tell you fellas this. All right, so again, admittedly, I'm going to go back and say, most prophets in the Old Testament that we know are men. But just like in Deborah's case, you have this exceptional case of a woman who is very authoritative and serving in a considerable capacity. Micah chapter 6 and verse 4 brings to attention a woman that I actually skipped when we started with Deborah. For I brought you up from the land of Egypt and redeemed you from the house of slavery, and I sent before you Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. This is a reminder that Israel, as they exited Egypt, was led by three primary people: Moses, Aaron, and a woman named Miriam. Three-part leadership. One of them is a woman, and she is a leader. I sent her before you, in front of you. Okay. She plays a significant role in the Exodus story. Exodus 6, 20 and 21, after Moses sings his very famous song in Exodus 6, then Miriam the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women went out after her with tambourines and dancing, and Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea." So what do we know about Miriam? She is, again, a prophetess. She is a leader sent by God. She is named alongside Moses and Aaron. Not bad company to be in terms of hierarchy and authority. She's secondary to Moses, but so is Aaron. It's not like, well, you're a woman, so you're secondary. Everybody was secondary to Moses. Numbers 12, 1 through 6 discusses a little bit of that relationship. Now, of interest, again, that this is one of those that complementarians and egalitarians are going to disagree on the significance of this. She leads the women in worship in this text that we read. I think I said Exodus 6 a minute ago. It was Exodus 15, not Exodus 6. Yeah, Exodus 15, 20 and 21. I didn't think that sounded right. Exodus 6 was too early. Anyway, in Exodus 15, 20, 21, she leads the women in worship. So the complementarian would say this: notable women in the scriptures prove that women may exercise leadership in some circumstances. However, male leadership remains the norm in most Old Testament texts. And even the Miriam text shows her leading women, but not specifically leading men. An egalitarian would say notable women in the scriptures prove that God intended women to be leaders along with men. That men normally were leaders reflects the norms of ancient patriarchal society, but not God's will. Remember, not everything that has ever happened was good. Some things have happened and were bad, and God worked through the badness to overcome it. And so it's possible that, or egalitarian would say it's certain, that a patriarchal slant in the Old Testament is the result of just the ancient world, not the fact that God wanted it that way. Kind of as a side note, but I feel like I need to mention this before we leave the Old Testament. There is some concern, and you heard this in the lesson I gave you earlier on what I call the radical feminist interpretation of the Bible. Try not to be pejorative there, just I don't know what else to call it. That the Bible is inherently demeaning to women and can't be trusted. And I want to talk about that a little bit because most of that comes out of Old Testament texts, and so it warrants some consideration. First of all, we need to acknowledge many, what Phyllis Trible called texts of terror, show awful things happening to women. And that's just true. Okay, there are some terrible things happening in the Hebrew Scriptures. Hagar has a rough life. The concubine in Judges chapter 19 that gets chopped into pieces. It's an awful story, gut-wrenching. Jephthah's daughter, difficult story. None of those are good things. And the Bible doesn't say they're good. None of these stories approve of the way these women are treated. In fact, I would argue that in the most terrible, gut-wrenching stories about women in the Old Testament, condemnation is even implied. No one's rewarded for treating women this way. In fact, terrible things happen as a consequence of treating women this way. So yes, there are stories in the Bible that talk about women being demeaned. That's not the same as saying the Bible is demeaning women. That's saying it's giving you the stories of people that demeaned women and the tragic consequences of doing that. It's a parable of warning. Don't do that. Okay. There are some more notable examples, however, where it seems like the Bible just out and out demeans women right at the face value. And I want to talk about those for just a minute and see if I can maybe help us wrestle with those a little bit. One is Leviticus 12, 2 through 5, and part of the Levitical code of the Old Testament. Speak to the people of Israel, saying, if a woman conceives and bears a male child, then she shall be unclean 7 days. But if she bears a female child, then shall she be unclean 2 weeks. Kind of sounds like you're saying a female baby makes you more unclean, doesn't it? Well, you could read it that way, but I would encourage you to read the rest of the text. This is verses 6 and 7, for example. When the days of her purifying are completed, whether for a son or for a daughter, she shall bring to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting a lamb a year old for burnt offering, and a pigeon or a turtle dove for a sin offering. And he shall offer it before the Lord and make atonement for her. This is the law for her who bears a child, either male or female. Okay. So what do we notice there? Yeah, on the one hand, ceremonial purity laws in Leviticus are just arbitrary. If you're asking for the logic of Leviticus, I can give you some guidelines and help you understand it. But at the end of the day, some of it is not going to make a lot of sense to you. Why is it bad in one passage in Leviticus for men to have rounded the back of their hair? Like it needs to be cut straight or long, but not rounded. I don't know. Why is it bad to sew two different kinds of fabrics together? Or crops, cross-pollinating or whatever. I don't know. There might be some logic to that that's really insightful, but on the surface, at least, it seems kind of arbitrary. So when I see the purity laws saying, well, a son is born, there's impurity for this long, a woman is born, a daughter, it's impure for this long, I don't assume that necessarily just immediately tells me something that one's better than the other. Furthermore, impurity is not evil. There were perfectly natural things that made you impure, like having children. This is an example of that. Having children isn't evil. It's just an abnormal thing. It's not an everyday occurrence, okay? So when something was out of the ordinary, Leviticus quite often kind of categorized that as, this is unclean, here's how we're going to handle that out of the ordinary event. Lots of things fall into that category. Touching a dead body. But hey, somebody's got to bury dead bodies. People die. So it's not evil. It just means something has happened out of the ordinary. Here's a rule for that. And that was the sense of impurity. I think in our minds, we hear impurity, we think evil, sin. And that's not what it means in the law. Perhaps ancient people thought mothers needed extra time to care for newborn girls. I mean, have you thought about the fact, I don't want to read too much into it, but this is essentially, what do we call it? Maternal leave, in a sense of this woman gets some time off. She's had a child. And when it's a daughter, she got more. That's not necessarily a bad thing. So I know it's kind of weird to our modern ears because we would just never think of it that way. But for an ancient person, maybe that made sense. So when I read that, again, my point is, yeah, it is a little strange. I don't exactly know why it's one way or the other, but it does not tell me that they thought children were distinct in value a male more than a woman. Quite the opposite. I don't see that at all. Exodus 20, verse 17, you shall not covet, this is one of the 10 commandments, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay, now wait a second. Did Moses just say that a wife is basically the same as a servant or a donkey or a possession? I don't really like that. Kind of would be my answer to that. Definitely it's slanted in the sense it doesn't reciprocate. It doesn't say, and women, your husband, right? It's definitely spoken to men. And again, most of the Old Testament is written to men because that's how the ancient world was structured. But that doesn't mean that this is necessarily demeaning to women. The Bible, for example, also in the law, Deuteronomy 24:5, said that a man's lawful duty was to give happiness to his wife. That's kind of surprising. If you're an ancient person and you think your wife is a possession, then it's her job to give happiness to me. Deuteronomy says, yeah, she's your wife. You have her as a possession, if you want to make that comparison, but you have an obligation to make her happy. That's not the way possession's supposed to work, right? If I own you, you work for me. And the text says, no, it is a reciprocal obligation of the husband to the wife. So I would say, yeah, actually marriage does imply possession. I know that just is crazy to modern ears. No, it's not that way. Yeah, in the Bible, possession, marriage is a kind of possession. And in fact, if you read Paul, 1 Corinthians 7:4, he says, absolutely, the husband owns the wife just as the wife owns the husband. It's mutual ownership. That when you're married, you no longer belong to yourself. So in the commandment then, it says, yeah, this is the person of yours. This is your wife, your spouse. And you should not be envying someone else's spouse. And it happens to state it in a male-inclined sentence, the man, the wife, but it doesn't mean the other isn't true. It's just a statement of fact that marriage involves possession, and it's supposed to be that way. And the New Testament clarifies it's mutual. I am a possession of my wife. I belong to her in some sense. I know that's scary for people, but the Christian doctrine of marriage has that component in it. What about Deuteronomy 21, 10 through 13? When you go out to war against your enemies and the Lord your God gives them into your hand and you take them captive, and you see among them captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to be your wife, and you bring her home to your house, she shall shave her head and pare her nails, and she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured and shall remain in your house and lament her father and her mother a full month. After that, you'll go into her and be her husband, and she shall be your wife. Okay, now Ben, this is human trafficking. You're going to go kidnap a woman and take her and marry her. Verse 14, but if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants. You shall not sell her for money. You shall not treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. So it's another interesting interjection into the ancient world. God is saying, I know there's a lot of war going on. When you go in and have these battles and you bring your spoils home, let me tell you something, God says, you have an obligation. This woman is not going to be the spoils of your war. She's a human being. Number one, you're going to give her a month to mourn her parents. That's not in many of the Geneva Conventions, right? You're going to give her a month to mourn the loss of this tragic war. And then you're going to marry her, right? This is not you're going to rape her and leave her for dead, which would have been the practice of the ancient world. God says none of that. This is not rape and murder and pillaging. You're going to marry her. You're going to provide for her. And even if later you decide you don't like her anymore, too bad, you can let her go free, but you can't sell her. She's not a slave. She's a person. She's your wife. So I know, again, it sounds so strange to modern ears, but what we're reading here is not, go take women slaves and rape them. What God is saying is, if you go have a war with a foreign nation and take one of their women, but what should happen to women after war? Think about that. Think of it in an ancient context, not a modern one, an ancient context. I'm appalled by warfare from the beginning, right? But if you just take for granted for a moment that wars happen in the ancient world, what should happen? God says the refugees are going to be treated like people. If you want a foreign woman, you can marry her. You cannot own her. That's not allowed. Strange as it sounds, if you think about it in that light, these rules protected women from exploitation, violence, and destitution. God is saying you can't leave them for dead. You can't rape them and pillage them and leave them. You can marry them and provide for them or not. Those are the options. War is ugly and terrible. This is a rule that seems to be trying to mitigate that to protect women and keep men from being barbarians. It's just that we're so far removed from that world that it's hard to even think that way, because I don't think that way. I don't think about pillaging the neighborhood village, and go down the street and finding a woman I want. That's not how we operate. Think about it in a more barbaric world. God's saying, you got to stop this. It's got to be different. Leviticus 27, 1 through 8. The valuation of a male, this is a text about slavery. The valuation of a male from 20 years old up to 60 years old shall be 50 shekels of silver, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. If the person is a female, the valuation shall be 30 shekels. If the person is from 5 years old to 20 years old, the valuation shall be for a male 20 shekels and a female 10 shekels. Okay, now Ben, you can't possibly tell me that passage is okay. It's got slavery, and not only does it have slavery, men are literally valued more than women. It gave a dollar amount. They're worth 20 shekels more than a woman is. How can that not be demeaning to women? Well, let's talk about that. First of all, in the ancient world, chattel slavery was normalized. and it was terrible. And I believe, if you read the Bible, God's not a fan. I think you can read the Old Testament, and he has quite a lot of rules that kind of subverted slavery, that you couldn't be the kind of profiteering slave owner you wanted to be. God made it where it was just like, this isn't worth the effort. There's going to be a better way to do this, which I think was the point. You can argue with me on that. Talk about it another day. But point one, slavery exists in the ancient world. The Old Testament, point number two, reforms that system and provides protection for slaves. I have lots of views on economics and capitalism and socialism and slavery that would take more time than I have to share in this video, but I'll just say that what the Old Testament was doing was really profound. As much as just the word slavery immediately makes the hairs on the back of our neck stand up, what the Old Testament was saying is, whatever system of economics you engage in, you have to treat the people in it as people. And there are going to be rules on that. It's not anything goes. Are there better and worse ways to do it? Yes. I would like to get rid of slavery altogether. But in this text, it's trying to reform it. So third, my point is this. If you're willing to accept those premises, and I know they're very difficult all on their own, it's a really challenging text. I completely agree. If you understand and accept that slavery happened in the ancient world, and if you understood that the Old Testament was trying to reform that practice and restore some human dignity, well, then it doesn't actually seem surprising anymore that women are priced lower for men. Well, why not? Well, if you're purchasing a person based on physical labor prowess and potential, whatever you think about equality, physiology doesn't lie. Male body mass is on average higher than female body mass. It's a fact. I don't know what to tell you about that. It's just true. Males don't get pregnant and find themselves in a situation where they can't work on the field or the quarry or whatever for a period of time. So from a purely economic, cold calculating perspective, you understand why someone would say, well, of course, a male slave was of greater price than a female slave. That one still bugs me. I'll just tell you, I'm being honest with you, that passage, it bugs me all over. I can understand the kind of cold logic of it, but again, it's so embedded in the ancient world and some of the awfulness of the ancient world, it's hard for me to make peace with it because of that. But I think that's what's going on in that passage. Deuteronomy, finally, 22, 28 through 29 is one that a lot of women point to and say, look, Ben, I can't believe the Bible because this is in it. If a man meets a virgin who is not betrothed and seizes her and lies with her, and they are found, then the man who lay with her shall give to the father of the young woman 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife. Because he has violated her, he may not divorce her all his days. This passage seems to say that a woman had to marry the man who raped her. How can that not be an abusive subjection of women to terrible cruelty? And again, I'm going to say, I know this is hard to get because I'm not an ancient person and I don't live in their world. If you read that passage carefully, it is written as a protection for women. God does not say, go rape a woman. Rape is wrong. Full stop. Rape is wrong. What God says, when a woman is raped by a man, that man has obligation. That man is now required to provide for that woman and to marry her. Matrimony, I think we forget this, matrimony is designed to protect women. The word matrimony, mater, is Greek for mother. Matrimony exists because stupid, awful, terrible men would be happy to sleep with women, get them pregnant, and walk away from their responsibility. Matrimony is where we say, nope, you're going to stand in a church or a temple. You're going to take vows in front of people, and we're going to hold you accountable. That there is an obligation here that means something. So men were not allowed to treat sex as a sport or a conquest. You see, it's very different. Much of the ancient world did sex. In fact, much of the modern world treats sex as a sport or a conquest. And the Bible says, no, if you're going to sleep with that woman, you marry that woman. And the same is said for seduction in Exodus 22, 16, and 17. That it's just a universal rule. God says that's not what sex is about. When you do that, you create an obligation. At the end of that verse, did you notice it? He may not divorce her all his days. Don't skip over that, because the law of Moses did have a provision for divorce. Under the law of Moses, under certain rules, you could divorce your spouse, but not in this case. The man is told, if you rape a woman and you think sex is a conquest, here's the rule: you will marry her, you will provide for her, you will provide for her children, and no matter what, you will never divorce her. It's forbidden. This also prevented the community from treating the woman as defiled or even an adulterer, which often happened. Again, in the ancient world, a woman is a subject of rape, and even in the modern world, sometimes a woman is a subject of rape, and we treat her like she's the guilty party. This says, no, you will dignify that woman. You will marry that woman. She will be your wife, and your honor will be tied to hers. So again, it's hard to understand because of the brutality of the ancient world. But I actually think reading these passages carefully, these passages of concern seem to be laws relating and responding to the fallen ancient world and its barbarism. And viewed in that light, in many cases, they're actually protective of women. Not in the way that modern laws are protective of women, because it wasn't the modern world. I don't expect a modern audience to be comfortable with them, because I'm not. I'm a modern person, and I don't like it. I don't like that world ever existed. But if you can understand the circumstances a little better, you can begin to understand what those rules intended. They're not punishments for women. They are protections for women against an assumption of wicked men. So give that some thought. I hope it maybe clarifies some of that. Be happy to answer some more questions later on if you want to send those in. And then we'll move ahead to the New Testament next time.